So what are your concrete proposals for, and you guys can go back and forth here, for what Congress and the president need to do to protect not just students, but everyone from gun violence in cities, in rural areas. I mean, in every part of this country, gun violence is plaguing states specifically that have more guns, have higher rates of gun deaths. But nationally, as a national discourse, what do you want to see the federal government do to combat this concretely?
Well, I think that an assault weapons ban is more symbolic rather than it will be. It will be, of course, it will be effective, but I think it shows that we are taking steps, no matter how little they may be, in the right direction. I would really love to see more psychiatric evaluations being actually like routinely applied to people with firearms, as well as a sort of legislation that can help enforce and close the straw man loophole. I think that is a major issue, especially when it comes to people who shouldn't be owning guns.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I know you said earlier, gun violence isn't just happening in schools, right? I mean, school shootings represent such a small minority of the gun violence that we see in our country. Earlier this week, I was at a town hall in Washington, D.C. for D.C. students, and I went there with the intention to speak and to say something, but the kids there, I mean, these are kids that live half an hour from my house, and they're talking about how they can't even go to school without fearing being killed. The kids were talking about one of their friends who had been shot and killed 300 feet away from his house, and he was just leaving a college prep class, right? So I think in this conversation, one of my biggest fears about this conversation about gun violence and gun control and gun safety reform is that we sometimes unintentionally leave out how minority communities are disproportionately affected by gun violence. And in DC, I mean, these guns aren't coming from DC, for example. They're coming from other areas. They're coming from states like Idaho and other places in the Midwest. So when we talk about proposals for gun reform, yes, we do need a ban on AR-15 style weapons. Yes, we do need increased psychiatric evaluations and closing the gun show loophole. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that we can't leave out these minority communities that are disproportionately affected by gun violence, because they see it more than any of us do. It's like, and that was the most shocking part for me. We live half an hour away from each other, yet our worlds and our realities are completely different, because they've basically been left behind by our government, even more so than we have as students, right? Like, our government doesn't represent their constituents properly sometimes. They've just been left behind, and that's one important thing in this debate that I think you should focus on.
I think it goes to show how powerful the NRA lobby is, that even when the mostly white students from an affluent neighborhood bring this to their attention in Parkland, they still won't do anything.
Usually
they listen to those rich white kids.
Usually I mean, that's just how history's occurred. Usually when white people join the forefront of a social justice movement, it helps a lot. But this time, even when it's mostly white students who are at the front of this movement, the NRA is so powerful. I mean, they only have like 5 million members, right? But the majority of the people who live in this country are in favor of gun control legislation. But still, overwhelmingly, yeah. But still, the NRA stands strong and comfortable, and they have these politicians in the palm of their hands. So
actual final question: do you guys currently have faith that this will go through? It may not be today, it may not be under President Trump, it may not be tomorrow, but do you have faith that because of your activism that something will happen in like arbitrary timeline, next 7 years?
I actually have a tremendous amount of faith that this will pass, because I do think that before, especially even in Montgomery County, a fairly liberal county, we do have a lot of support. When there are bomb threats and threats or like of a shooter being in a building, like other students at Montgomery County high schools are so desensitized to gun violence that they just continue with their lives, and they just act like nothing even happened. And even more so for communities that are affected by gun violence on a daily basis, they have become extremely desensitized. It's become a part of their daily life, and they've just accepted it to be that way. And I think that our movement, and the Parkland students especially, how they've spurred students and kids to action, I think that we also will inspire other kids to do the same. And because we are the next generation of voters, we'll be able to successfully vote those people who do take bribes, or not bribes, but take money from the
bribes.
NRA. And
That's bribes.
Yeah.
Don't sugarcoat it.
and we'll be able to replace them with people who are just and actually do represent their constituents. And I think that with support from our communities as well as the federal government, I don't think anybody can really stop us.